Maseches Nedarim Daf Dalid contains three primary sugyas. The first is the Gemara's continued search for a situation in which a Nazir violates the Isser to delay Naziris, Bal Ta'acher. That'll take us into a discussion of what is strange about Naziris. Why is it a Chiddush? Then the Gemara will discuss the source of the halacha that a father can be meifir his daughter's Nedarim and Naziris. And then the Gemara will get into the exact formula which we've seen in our Mishnah of partial Nedarim statements and how they work exactly. So let's begin. The Gemara has said that we learned from a drasha that if a Nazir delays the beginning of his Naziris period, he violates the Isser Bal Ta'achar. The Gemara wants to know, how is that possible? How could he delay it? As soon as he says he's a Nazir right away. So the Gemara has already given one answer. The Gemara is now going to bring three more. So the Gemara quotes Rav Acha bar Yaakov. Says the first answer, he says he makes the net of Naziris. He says, Hareini Nazir, I am a Nazir, and he's in a cemetery. Now, part of the halachas of Naziris that is not going to be Tameh, but he's already Tameh. So, therefore, his Naziris doesn't begin yet. And what he has to do is get out of that cemetery, be Matar as fast as he can, and start his Naziris as fast as he can. If he delays, that's Bal Ta'acher. He's violating the Isser. Do not delay keeping a promise, keeping a neder that you made. So, Gemara says this is not so fast. What the halacha of a person who makes himself a Nazir while he's in a cemetery, what happens is a machlokes between Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish elsewhere, which we will get to in its right time. Machlokes is the Naziros chal automatically at that time, or does the Naziros only take effect later? Rav Yochanan holds that it takes effect right away. So were he to now drink wine or take a haircut while he's in the cemetery, even though he's Tameh, and he's violating his Naziris because he's Tameh, he's also doing another Isser now because he is a Nazir, and he gets Malchus for that. According to Reish Lakish, no, the Naziris only happens later. It only happens after, and therefore he is not a Nazir yet, and it's delayed, and he has to go do it as quickly as he can. So says Gemara, what are you going to do according to Rav Yochanan's opinion? According to Rav Yochanan, he's a Nazir right away. You haven't given me a situation in which he's actually delaying his Naziris. Also, says the Gemara, even Reish Lakish really holds that the Naziris begins right away. He just holds that the Isser to take a haircut and all the other Yisum of Naziris, that doesn't start right away. Since he can't keep the halacha of Tumah, he can't keep the other halachos as well. You won't get Malchus for that. But the actual Naziris begins instantly. And we know that because when he leaves the cemetery, he doesn't have to be a Mekabel Naziris upon himself again. As second he steps out of the cemetery and he's Metaher, the Naziris hits automatically. So you see, therefore, there is no Isser to delay. He really is a Nazir right away. Just a question of do the other halachas apply or not. So this answer doesn't work. So the Gemara says, no, it does work. And I'll tell you why. Because the proper Naziris with Tahara doesn't begin. The halacha is if a Nazir becomes Tameh, he has to do his Naziris over again b'tahara, and here he's tamei, and therefore he has to take the naziris b'tahara. He has to do a proper naziris. That's something that he can't do until he goes out and he's matar himself, even though he is a nazir right away. A proper nazir he's not, and that he's delaying as long as he hangs around in the cemetery. He's got to go do it right away. So that's called delaying, and that's an isser bal ta'acher. Says the Gemara. So you see from this, Rav Ashi says that if a nazir actually is matami himself on purpose, he violates bal ta'acher because he's now no longer keeping the Nazir's Batara. He's violating the completion of his Nazir's Batara. He's got to go start over. And that's a delay, and therefore it's also, besides for the other Isurim of being Matami himself as a Nazir, he's also violating Bal Ta'acher. Okay, that's the Gemara's first answer here. Now the Gemara gives another answer as to how you have delaying. The Gemara says you're not delaying the Nazir. So when we say that there's an Isser Bal Ta'acher, there's an Isser delaying on a Nazir, we're not talking about delaying the beginning of the Nazir's period. We're talking about the delaying part of the obligatory steps concluding the Nazir's period. So we'll have two approaches to this. At our end, the first one is at the end of the Naziris, he has to take a haircut. What if he delays taking that haircut? So that's Bal Ta'acher. He's violating the mitzvah that he has to do. Now, there is a man Amar that he actually has his Naziris restrictions lifted before he takes the haircut, but that doesn't change anything. They may be lifted, but he still is obligated to take the haircut, and if he pushes it off and he does not do it, it's Bal Ta'acher on the mitzvah to take the haircut. Now the Gemara gives its third approach, which is really 2B of this approach, but this one is going to have a much longer discussion. And the Gemara says he has to bring a carbon. He has to bring a carbon chatas, asham, and shlamim when he finishes Naziris. If he delays, let's say he delays bringing the carbon chatas. So that's delaying bringing a carbon that he has to bring. That's Bal Ta'acher. He's got to bring that And if he does not, that's delaying, and therefore that's where your Isser Balta Acher is. All right, so that says, the Gemara, hold on a second. You're telling me that if he delays bringing his Karban Chatas, he violates Balta Acher. You don't learn that from Balta Acher that he has to delay that. You don't learn that from a special pasuk. We said you learn that the Isser Balta Acher applies to Nazirus. We said on the last half the Isser Balta Acher applies by Nazirus. We learn from a Hekesh to Nedarim. You don't need that. You have, because the Torah says Ki Darosh Yidershenu. The Torah says that any carbon that you're chayav to bring, if you don't bring them, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to claim them from you, meaning to say that there's an Isser. Darosh Yidershenu Hashem lekechem imach v'hayev v'chachet. You got to bring anything that you're chayav to bring. So he's chayav to bring a carbon chatos. So he better bring it, and that's learned from Darosh Yidershenu. You don't need a Hekesh to Nedarim to teach you that delay. It says the Gemara, no, you do need it, because I would think that since Nazirus is such a new, interesting halacha, it's different than all other halachas. I would therefore think that the halacha that you can't delay the carbon doesn't apply to Nazirus. You're right, it applies to everything else, but I would think it doesn't apply to Nazirus because it's a chiddush. So the Gemara says, what is a chiddush? Where do you see that Nazirus is any chiddush? So the Gemara is going to try a few options to show that Nazirus is a chiddush, and therefore you would think, if not for the Hekesh to Nedarim, you would think that the Isser to delay the carbon chatas doesn't apply. Now, the first option is that it's a chiddush, because you cannot make a voluntary Nazirus chatas. You cannot say, I'm mechayev myself to bring a Nazirus chatas. So that's a new halacha. Why shouldn't you be able to voluntarily obligate yourself? Most karbanis you could decide. You could say, I want to bring a shlovim, I want to bring an olo. Why can't you say, I want to bring a Nazir's chatas? So the Gemara says, what do you mean? That's not a chiddush. You can't bring any chatas. You can't decide to volunteer to bring any carbon chatas for any other avera either. So what does that mean? So says the Gemara, like the specific example, the Gemara brings is chaylev. Someone says, I want to bring a chatas for eating chaylev, even though we never ate chaylev. You can't do that. So there's nothing chiddush about the fact that it can't bring a chatas nazir. The Gemara is going to come back to this answer later, but now the Gemara tries something else first. The Gemara says, okay, I'll tell you what the chiddush is. The chiddush is that somebody makes himself a nazir on part of the halachas of nazir. He becomes a full nazir. Let's say he says, I want to be a nazir, and the fact that I'm not going to drink grapes or grape products. I'm not going to drink grape wine, or I'm not going to eat grapes. So he says only that halacha. So the halacha is that he becomes a full nazir. So that's a chiddush. You don't find that somewhere else. So because of that chiddush, you would think, because it's new, you would therefore think that the halacha that you can't delay the carbon does not apply. So the Gemara has two kashas on this. The Gemara says, first of all, Reb Shimon disagrees. Reb Shimon says he's not a nazir, so therefore this chiddush halacha is not true according to him, so you still need another answer according to him. Second of all, this is a chiddush l'chumra. This is a way in which nazir is oddly strict. It was oddly strict. Certainly I would think that the Isser of Balta Acher, its carbon, applies. Why would that be? The fact that it has an extra chiddush like a stringency is not a reason for me to think that it has an extra chiddush like a leniency, and the Isser Balta Acher does not apply. Says the Gemara, you're right. We'll try some new answers. Answer number one is that the real halacha is that you're supposed to take the haircut at the end of Nazirus. One is supposed to take the haircut after he brings all three karbanos. However, if he brings only one of them and then it does the haircuts, it counts, and his Isser of Nazirus are lifted. That's a special leniency that you don't find anywhere else, and therefore you may think that the Isser Balta Acher does not apply. The second answer we're going to say now is we're going to go back to our original approach that the fact that he cannot volunteer to bring a carbon chatas that he can't volunteer to bring a nazir's chatas, that's a chiddush. You asked me, you can't volunteer to bring a chaylev chatas either. That's because there's a reason that triggers a chaylev chatas. That's if somebody brought chaylev and he's doing something, he's getting himself a kapara. So you don't need the kapara, you can't just volunteer to bring the chatas. However, nazir's chatas is not doing anything. There is no kapara. He didn't do any aveira. That's a machlokes whether he didn't have hair or not. But there is no specific need that he needs to do to bring that chatas, and therefore he should be able to volunteer. And that's a chiddush, even though it's not fulfilling any purpose, you can't volunteer. At most korbanos where there is no specific stated obligation that you need to do, there's no purpose you need to do, then there's no. That's not to say that it doesn't have a purpose. That's to say that the Torah didn't command you to do it in order to fulfill a certain requirement. You should be able to volunteer that. So Gemara says, no, there is another example of something which has no specific need, and that's a chatas of a yoledes. A woman who gives birth has to bring a korban chatas. She also didn't do any aveira. So you see that you can't volunteer to bring a chatas yoledes, even though there's nothing specific there. So that's where, no, there is a function there. The chatas yoledes allows her to eat kachim. She's not allowed to eat kachim before she brings that chatas, and therefore there is a function to that chatas, and it is related to what her state is before then. She's a state of tumah before then. It's part of her tahara process. However, the nazir doesn't need to bring the korban chatas. It doesn't free him up. It doesn't give him kapara. It doesn't allow him to eat kachim. It doesn't give him any change that he couldn't do before, and therefore you should be able to volunteer it. The fact that you can't volunteer it is a chiddush, and therefore, since that chiddush is true, I would think that there's also a chiddush that there's no iser bal ta'acher, that just from the Rosh Yidrashenu, and therefore I need the hekesh to Nedarim to teach me that there is an iser bal ta'acher. We now get to our second discussion. We'd seen on the last daf that we learned that a husband can be meifir, and a father can be meifir their wives or daughters Naziros. We learned that out of Nedarim through a hekesh, through a specific link that's an unbreakable link. So the Gemara says, why do you need a hekesh to teach that? Why don't you just say mamatzinu? You see that there's a concept of hafara by a neder, so there should be a concept of hafara by Naziros too. What would be the kasha that you need a hekesh to override? Sometimes the kasha might be there's a very simple difference, and that's that Naziros has an automatic expiration. So maybe the husband and the father can only cancel a neder which doesn't expire because they can't live with it, and therefore we give them cancellation power. However, Naziros, all right, Naziros is 30 days. What's the big deal? Just, do what you have to do and survive it. And therefore, I would think that you cannot learn it from the Nedarim. Kamash Malon, the hekesh, that you can, and it overrides that potential question. The Gemara now begins a whole new sugya. That's a statement of Shmuel. Shmuel is referring to the yados, the way to make a partial statement of a neder. So we've seen in the Mishnah two types. One is where he uses a partial way to say that I'm going to be separate from you. This is talking about somebody who wants to say that he's not going to have hana. He's making a neder. He's not going to have hana from his friend. So he says, Mudrani mimcha, mufreshani mimcha, muruchkani mimcha. All these things are partial ways of saying that I'm not going to have hana from you. Those are all similar. And then the second category is where he says, Sha'ani ochel lecha, sha'ani tom lecha. Those where he's specifically saying that I eat from you, that I taste from you, but he didn't say the separation half. So these are the two halves. The first half where he says, I am separated, and the second half where he says, from eating from you. So says Shmuel, you can't have just the first half. You can't have Madrani Mimcha, Mafrani Marchani Mimcha. That doesn't work that's not enough to make a yad. You have to have some expression of hana, of Ochel Lecha Sh'ani Tom Lecha. You have to have those two together. So the Gemara, of course, asks, but the Mishnah clearly says that you do. It lists the first three where he says the first half. He says Madrani Mimcha, Mafreshani Mimcha, Marachkani Mimcha, and then separately he lists the second half, Shani Och Lecha, Shani Tom Lecha. So where says that's not a question. The second half is really it's complementing the first half. The first half you can't have by itself. The second half, which is Shani Ochel, Shani Toim, that adds on to the first half. You could have those two together. Then it is going to be a real yad, a real neder. If you just have the first half, it won't be. So now everybody agrees that if you just have the second half, that's enough. If you just say Shani Ochelcha, Shani Tomcha, that's enough. So Gemara has a kasha. There's a brisa that flips the order. The brisa that says Shani Ochelcha, Shani Tomcha aser, Madrani Mimcha, Mafreshani Mimcha, Marachani Mimcha aser. So Gemara says here you can't tell me that the second half of the brisa is explaining the first half of the brisa, because when he first says Shani Ochelcha, Shani Tomcha, that's for sure good. Nobody argues on that. So what is the second half doing? Someone says that's not a problem. I'll just say that what it means is Shani Ochlacha, Shani Talmlacha, going on a situation where he already said Mufrashani Murchkani Mudrani, that makes that into a proper neder. So the beginning of the brisa is saying, add the following phrase onto what we're about to list, and now that's how it's all going to work. So the Gemara says, okay, but then what's the chiddush of this altogether? You're not adding anything. Now, if you would have told me that you need to say only one of them, it works. So then, okay, so I have a chiddush in this brisa that I wouldn't think that if I only had the Mishnah, I would think that it's only the second half is explaining the first half and it's adding on to the first half. Here it's coming to tell me either one is okay. But if it's telling me the same thing, it's telling me that you have to say Shani Ocholcha, you can't just say Mufar Shani Mimcha, so then you didn't add any halacha. So what is this all about? The second problem is that it says usher on both the first half and second half of the brisa separately. It says Mufrashani Mimcha, Marachani Mimcha, Majani Mimcha is usher, and then it also says Shani Tom Mimcha, Shani Ocholcha is usher. This implies that each one is its own hana. So the Gemara therefore revises its understanding of what Shmuel said. Shmuel never said that there's a problem saying Mufrashani, and although those are a neder in and of itself, the thing is those expressions Madrani, Mufrashani, Marachani, that creates an isser both ways. It creates an isser on the one who said it and on the one that he made an isser on. Because he's saying, I'm not going to have any enough from you, and you're not going to have any enough from me. That goes both ways. If he would say, Sha'ani ochel, then he's limiting it to, I won't have enough from you. But the other person is allowed to have enough from him. And that's what Shmuel is teaching me.